All right, welcome back, everyone. My name is Dave. I've got Scott Ritter with us today again. Last time I made the mistake of, what is it, military pronouncing Scott, I think. He is a former intelligence officer with the Marines, right? Not, I think
Not the Navy, not the Navy.
I might have said the Navy, and so I apologize for that, and Scott corrected me. And also a former UN weapons inspector and a very sought-after analyst right now. There's so much going on. Scott, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine, thank you. Yourself?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty good. So let's let's get your blood pressure up here. Representative Jason Crow from Colorado, who's I guess a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, is talking about sending F-16s to Ukraine so they can fight those wascally Russians. And, it seems like every time there's bipartisan consensus on something like this, Scott, I get really worried. I get really worried. You got Republicans and Democrats going on TV saying, yes, we need to send F-16s. And, each week I'm thinking maybe somebody will raise their hand and go, hey, maybe we should start a peace process. A guy like Matt Gaetz, he's got a resolution out there, I believe. I'm not sure if it's on Ukraine, but I'm thinking it might be on the spending end of things. I mean, you can't really question the spending. You can't question, where that money might be going, where those arms might be, like whose hands they might actually be falling into. So I was wondering about your take on the push for the F-16s, and it seems as though there are a couple of interesting narratives that are starting to develop. The Russia-China narrative, which, I've always said on this particular platform that it seems like the left really doesn't like Russia for the most part, and the right tends to not like China. So this could be the best of all worlds for the military-industrial complex, really for the rest of our lifetimes, Scott. I'm in my 50s, and I think you're not too much older than me, but how much time do we have left, and how much war is there to have? It seems like the endless war, it's going to continue for the foreseeable future. So I know I gave you a lot there to work with. So what are your thoughts?
Well, let me just start with the F-16s. Old obese men with, heart problems and on oxygen probably shouldn't be talking about how they're going to conquer Everest. So Jason Crow and people of his ilk, they can speak all they want about providing F-16s to Ukraine, but the impossible is the impossible.
Right.
It's not going to happen. I'm not worried about it. I'm not fearful of it. And like almost everything we do with Ukraine, if we were to go forward with it, it would only make Ukraine weaker because it raises expectations artificially. And then the end result is everything is destroyed, more Ukrainians die, Russia gains even more. So, I mean, it's political showmanship. That's all it is. It's people posturing. Once again, Americans using Ukraine to serve their own personal interests. Jason Crow probably couldn't find Ukraine on a map. And if he could, he probably couldn't tell you the geopolitical importance of various regions, the history, why this is an issue. I think what he's doing is he's taking an issue that has been simplified in the minds of the American people. If you support Ukraine, give them all the weapons they need, they're asking for. Therefore, give them the F-16, and everything will be okay. Everything won't be okay. Ukraine's in a lot of trouble right now. F-16s won't change the ultimate algorithm that's in play here, and that is the depletion of Ukraine's ammunition resources regarding 155 millimeter artillery shells, which is the shell used by all of this fancy Western artillery that's been provided. They run out of ammunition sometime this summer. There's nothing NATO can do to change that equation. And when you run out of ammunition, it's game, set, match, it's over. We couldn't even get an F-16 in the air over Ukraine by this summer. So, I mean, again, fat old men shouldn't talk about conquering Everest. And in this case, Crow is a fat old man, and Everest is the F-16. So it's just silly to even talk about it. China and Russia, this is different. I personally think that China is in the process. Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and it was, even though they called it a special military operation, it was an invasion. Russia has articulated what I believe is a cognizable defense of this under Article 51. China takes a little bit of exception to it. They have a broader definition of sovereignty, and China has always had difficulty supporting the Russian actions. They haven't gone against Russia, but they haven't saddled right upside next to Russia and say, we're with you 100% on this one. But that's changing because there's a growing recognition that this conflict has gone beyond simply a Russian-Ukrainian spat into an existential struggle between Russia and the collective West. China's looking at the words and actions of the collective West, not only against Russia, but against China, and recognizing there before the grace of God go us. The Western intentions regarding China are quite clear. And I think China is recognizing that, as Russia had done with diplomacy, embracing the Minsk Accords, embracing a diplomatic outcome, embracing and negotiated into the conflict, only to find out that the West never had any intentions of doing that. China is, I think, beginning to recognize that the West's promise of mutual economic prosperity is a false hope, that the West has no intention of allowing China to prosper economically, that the West will conspire to do everything necessary to restrict and retard China's economic growth and China's economic viability going forward. And I think China is going to opt out of that narrative and opt into the we're with Russia narrative. And I think that's the direction we're heading, which means that, the West, I could see the West doubling down on militarism if they were to win the Ukrainian conflict. But they're going to lose the Ukrainian conflict, and they're going to lose it decisively. They're going to lose it in a manner which sees them deplete critical military stores. And I don't know how, after going into deficit spending, you suddenly think you're going to go on a Vegas trip, which is what a war with China would constitute. It's basically a trip to Las Vegas. You're going to put everything on the table, huge gamble. And generally, Vegas trips with the idea of get rich quick schemes in mind go badly for the people who go on them. So I think China understands that the best way to deter Western venturism in the Pacific is to ensure a decisive Russian victory in Europe. And I think that's the direction China's heading.
Yeah, I mean, our foreign policy is what brought these two countries together, though, right, Scott? Isn't the only reason we're here is because the United States wouldn't negotiate. There were deals that were trying to be brokered, I believe, last March, from what I understand. And, the UK and the US just kind of said, nope, we're not going to do that. And now here we are with Russia and China. And people on both sides of the aisle, I've noticed, are now panicking because this is the worst case scenario, but yet they're the ones that created this mess, no?
It's not just Russia, China, it's Russia, China, and Iran. All three are coming together, which is the trifecta of terror from the American perspective. The worst three possibilities. And yet they're coming together. The Iranians had traditionally had a Western-oriented focus on terms of development and political engagement. And because of the American-led West's actions against Iran, they've compelled Iran to pivot east. And it's not just towards Russia, where Iran is taking unprecedented steps in terms of military collaboration and political cooperation, but also China, where Iran is talking about, Iran is joining the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. They're talking about becoming members of BRICS, and they've even made talk about, having a partnership with the SCTO, the Russian sort of post-Cold War military arrangement of former, Soviet republics. this is like a never land for Iran. It's a whole new uncharted territory of economic expansion and geopolitical relevance. Having been blocked by the West, Iran is now moving into this trans-Eurasian economic union where there is tremendous opportunity in Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyz, all the stands are just basically lining up saying, we're ready for business. China is supportive of this. The new Silk Road is a reality. And, between Russia, China, and Iran, we are talking about creating an economic engine that is not only can outcompete the West, but is untouchable by the West. It won't have any of the traditional connectivity issues that allow the West to impose sanctions and influence. It'll be independent of the rules-based international order. This is empowering. And Russia's in that direction too. A lot of people don't listen to what Vladimir Putin says. I always encourage people to do so. It's a fool's errand if you don't. And his February 21st speech to the Russian Federal Assembly was quite enlightening if you just took the time to listen to what he said.
Yep.
And pretty much what he said is that Russia has become self-sufficient economically. The West is talking about how they can sanction Russia, how they can weaken Russia, how they can do, and Russia is saying, no, you failed. You see, we've actually divorced ourselves from you. We are working on a new economic reality based upon fiscal theories that are independent of the need for cheap Western investment. That was what drove the Russian engine before, the need for, cheap Western money to come into Russia and develop the economy, but develop the economy in a way that money that was made fled Russia. That day's over. Russia is investing in itself, and the money is being reinvested. And Russia's economy is growing, strengthening, despite the fact of sanctions and a war. And that kind of economic model, when transferred to a European economic union, a trans-Eurasian economic union of self-sufficiency, meaning they don't need Europe. They don't need the United States. They don't need any of this problem. They don't need to eat your poison. They can build this thing that is self-sustaining. That's the death knell of America's fiscal hegemony over the world. It's the end of the petrodollar's dominance and things of that nature. And that's the direction we're heading. It's a nightmare scenario for the West. They can't comprehend it because they've never allowed themselves to comprehend it because of hubris and arrogance that postulates that in the end, we will win, they will fail. Well, no, we are failing, they are winning, and we're not prepared for defeat. So this is going to be a very interesting decade to come.
Yeah. And it's funny that you mentioned sanctions there, because the White House just announced new sanctions against Russia, 200 individuals and entities, as they put it, along with, of course, $2 billion worth of support going again to Ukraine. And I really I'm beginning to question, the sanity of American citizens at this point who watch this stuff and say, okay, we just had this thing that happened in East Palestine. Okay, forget about what I talk about down here in Florida, where we're still recovering from a Category 5 hurricane. And just from the, looking at the dollars and cents issues, Scott, and we're just giving, $2 billion away. I talked to Fiorella the other day from RT News, which I know is a dangerous thing to do, but I spoke to her about this, about what it would cost to, say, fix, homelessness or help veterans in need who, have been forgotten about. And the numbers, we've already, gone 5, 6, 7 times more sending money to Ukraine than what it would cost to really, truly help people in this country. I don't care what side of the political aisle you're on. You could say, oh, it's wasteful spending over here. Meanwhile, like you say, we're $31 trillion or whatever it is, and climbing as far as the national debt goes. But why do we continue to think the sanctions are going to do anything? Or is this just politics? Is this tough guy Biden, yes, more sanctions, that's going to do it. We're here forever, basically. We're here to the end. We're never going to stop. I mean, I can ask you this question too. When will this stop, Scott? Is it when Russia has the decisive victory, or will they find a new way to just keep this going?
Well, first of all, understand that sanctions is not a policy. Sanctions is the lack of policy. Sanctions is what you do when you don't have a policy. Sanctions are designed to make you feel good about doing nothing. So that's what sanctions are. And inevitably, sanctions, because they do fail, and because they get you to commit down a course of action, they inevitably lead to conflict. They don't lead to peaceful resolution. So sanctions are literally the dumbest policy in the world. They don't work. They never have worked. They never will work, especially against nations like, for instance, Iraq. Didn't work. Iran didn't work.
Yeah.
Russia, not working. China won't work. India, nope. I mean, we just go on and on and on. Sanctions, don't. Turkey, nope, didn't work. They don't work. But what they do is they get politicians to commit to an issue without the cost. Meaning, instead of saying we're going to go to war on this is such a fundamental issue for America, we're going to war. It's a warlike action without the immediate consequences. But it's actually a sign of a failure of intellect, a failure of imagination, because what they don't understand is the vast majority of the times when you enter this sanctions-based approach, because it won't succeed, you end up doubling down on stupid, doubling down on stupid, doubling down on stupid, until you've gone so far down the path of confrontation that eventually the only policy left is confrontation. I think Americans should be grateful that Russia is going to win this war and win this war quickly. At least they should pray for it. I mean, we don't know the outcome yet. It hasn't happened. And anybody who thinks they know what's going to happen in all details is a fool. But I think the writing appears to be on the wall. We're getting to the point where I would feel confident betting on Russia in Vegas, and not feel that I would lose my bet. And the closer we can get to a decisive Russian victory, the less likelihood there is for a confrontation, because Russia's victory will defeat the trajectory. The longer this conflict goes, the more likelihood of American-Russian direct confrontation. But if Russia can nip this in the bud now, bam, win, and confront us with failure before we've gone too far down that line, that would be a good thing for America, because we don't need a war with Russia. We don't want a war with Russia. Unfortunately, the American people haven't quite come to that recognition yet, because they continue to cheer loudly for F-16s to Ukraine. They continue to believe that HIMARS and M777s and M1 Abrams can turn the tide of the battle. They continue to be ignorant about the horrific reality of the Ukrainian government and its ties to Bandera and neo-Nazi ideology. And so you take all this ignorance that defines the American approach towards Ukraine and you allow it to manifest itself over an extended timeline. That ignorance will lead to the inevitability of conflict. The sooner Russia can nip this in the bud, the better. And likewise, the sooner the West can be confronted with the failure of its approach towards Russia, maybe the sooner they'll recognize that a similar approach towards China will lead to a similar result, and they might look for alternatives rather than the sanctions-based confrontation that leads to the inevitability of military conflict. If we're hoping on the West to come to its senses on its own volition, though, that's misplaced hope. This is going to require a decisive Russian victory. And that means that, unfortunately, we're putting our future in the hands of Russia.
Wow.
And I don't like that at all, because I don't like to cede that kind of sovereign control over national fate into the hands of others, and pray that they're benevolent, pray that they're looking out for our best interests as well as their best interests. That's a very rare thing to occur.
Yeah. Well, you touch on something I think that's important. And last time I had you on, you got really fired up when we were talking about libertarians and the Rage Against the War Machine rally, which you were invited to, but then I guess you were uninvited to. Is that correct?
I was invited, uninvited, re-invited, disinvited. Yeah.
All right. So it's quite a process there. What I've been hearing, because I got a lot of feedback from that appearance, was that because you are kind of cheerleading for Russia, essentially saying, yeah, I hope they win, and they went in illegally, but yet you're kind of looking the other way, that they went in and they shouldn't have gone in. And, you know, even China, is, you were mentioning, you know, they probably shouldn't have went in and so forth. And most people say that probably it would have been great if they didn't have to go in, but yet they believe, you know, based on laws, that international law, that they should have gone in. But yet, you know, we're all kind of waiting to see what happens here, Scott. And you're saying on this particular broadcast here that we hope Russia wins because it'll get a lot worse if they don't win. And so what would be like a cutoff point? Are they trying to just kind of, you know, what was the term rope-a-dope Muhammad Ali used to use, where, you know, just everyone would get tired after a while, you know, and you hit them, you hit body blows for a long time, and they just get tired, and they throw their hands up, and, you know, by the 8th or 9th round they get knocked out, or they win, you know, a technical knockout or whatever. Is that what the foreign policy establishment is going for, or are they even that smart to even think that way?
Well, I mean, they're willing to fight to the last Ukrainian. But, you know, again, I take umbrage at the one-sided analysis of the Libertarian Party. And I'll just say straight up, the ignorance that's shown in that statement is beyond comprehension. It's as if NATO expansion never occurred. It's as if the 2014 coup d'etat, U.S.-backed coup d'etat in Kiev, never occurred. It's as if the policy of the Obama administration of regime change targeting Vladimir Putin never occurred. It's as if Minsk never occurred. It's as if the Russian diplomatic outreaches from 2014 to 2022 never occurred. It's as if Russia didn't seek an early termination of this conflict through a peace process that could have manifested itself in a peace agreement in Istanbul on 1 April never occurred. It's as if the libertarians don't have a fucking mind, is what it is. Okay, this is the most ignorant thing on the world, and I say that for anybody who's watching. Right, okay, right. If your position is solely premised on the notion that Russia's intervention is a violation of Ukrainian sovereignty, you don't know what you're talking about. This isn't an issue of journalistic balance. This isn't about saying, well, they said, now this said. No, this is a fundamental issue of right and wrong. This is about who's right, who's wrong. And when people say, well, Scott, you're pro-Russian because you're saying they're right. No, I'm pro-right. And it just so happens that Russia is right. Yeah. You know, if you check my history, I have not been pro-Russian my entire life. I'm not anti-Russian. I'm pro-fact. And there are occasions where Russia's actions have insulted my sensibilities, but not on Ukraine. Not on Ukraine. And you know, this is just, it's frustrating to hear people say they want to have, you know, they're looking for a peaceful solution. Hey, newsflash, people, if you don't define a problem properly, you can't come up with a solution. So if you define this conflict as a Russian violation of Ukrainian sovereignty, you will never come up with a solution because you've not identified the problem. You're solving nothing. You must recognize this conflict for what it is, an ongoing, decades-long provocation by the collective West to weaken Russia, to use conflict in Ukraine as a vehicle to undermine Russia, to, as Kenneth Rogoff said in Davos, to achieve regime change in Russia. He said it through the vehicle of economic sanctions, but there are people who seek to weaken Russia militarily by prolonging the conflict in Ukraine to the last Ukrainian, by the way, so that the Russian public loses faith in the military to achieve an outcome, therefore loses faith in Vladimir Putin, therefore conspires to remove Vladimir from Putin power. That's what it's all about, ladies and gentlemen. This is a policy of regime change. And if you don't see that, you're blind.
Yeah. Scott, what would be the best thing for the Ukrainian people? Not the, the oligarchs and all the corrupt people and the Azov group and all of that, but the rank and file, the citizens. What policy, what would be the best thing to pursue in order to mitigate more casualties? Because I'm assuming, I don't have numbers or anything, and I don't know if you have any data that I could get access to, but I guess my point is a lot of people are dying, and I'm assuming a lot of civilians are dying. You're not hearing reports, because if you hear a report that Russia is doing well, or a lot of civilians, and God forbid, I don't like hearing reports that civilians are dying. But I mean, what course of action, like today, if you're President Scott Ritter, right, and there's nobody above you who's pulling the puppet strings or telling you, no, you can't do that, Scott. What is the first thing you do? You call for a ceasefire? I mean, what is it?
Well, ceasefire to what end? I mean, ceasefires are stupid, frankly speaking.
All right.
There's a reason why there's violence. There's violence because there's good guys and there's bad guys. And the war comes to a conclusion when the good guys kill the bad guys. Would a ceasefire have been a good idea after Battle of Bulge in 1944-45 in that difficult winter? Let's call a ceasefire, guys, because damn it, the war just got inconvenient. Ceasefire. No, Hitler's on the ropes. You take him out. There's no ceasefire right now. Why? Because the modern day Hitler, Zelensky, is on the ropes. And his modern day fascist regime, the Bandera worshiping government of Kiev, is on the ropes. Yeah. You want the best solution for the Ukrainian people right now? Kill Zelensky.
Wow.
Kill Zelensky. The people of Ukraine, rise up, and instead of dying in Bakhmut, kill Zelensky. Remove him from power. Surround the headquarters of the right sector. Surround Svoboda Party. And do to them that which they did to the trade union. Burn them out. Man, we're talking about your existential survival, Ukraine. Because if you continue down this path, this Zelensky-driven path to your collective doom, you will all die. The good news so far is that the number of Ukrainian civilian deaths is minimized. And what I mean by that is we're looking at under 10,000. And if it's over 10,000, it's no more than 12,000. It's still a big number. I'm not trying to say no, but people don't need to understand that, generally speaking, in large-scale ground combat of this nature in the European environment, the death ratio is 1 to 1.
Yeah.
For every combatant that dies, there should be a civilian that dies. I'll point out that the liberation of Normandy, that wonderful cross-channel attack by American forces, British forces, French forces, Canadian forces, killed 60,000 French citizens. 60,000 French citizens died being liberated. Wow. So now we're in a conflict where Russia has probably lost upwards of 45,000 dead. The Ukrainians probably lost upwards of more than 300,000 dead. So we can comfortably say that 350,000 combatants have lost their lives, and you've only lost maximum 12,000 civilians. So the Ukrainian people have gotten a big pass on this. And the reason why they've gotten a pass is because of Russia and the way Russia has approached this war. So the Ukrainian people should understand that the Russians are not your enemy. Your enemy are those who make you suffer, and that is the Zelensky government. The majority of Ukrainian civilian casualties have occurred because Ukrainian troops have opted to use Ukrainian civilian population centers and as human shields. And I'm not making it up. The Washington Post and the Amnesty International, Humanitarian Watch, or Human Rights Watch, they've all come out and said the same thing. Ukrainians are using the civilian population as a human shield. That is a war crime. That's why civilians are dying in the numbers they are. Have Russians killed civilians? Yes. Are some of those civilian deaths unavoidable? Yes. Were some avoidable? Most likely. Could you charge a Russian soldier with a war crime? Maybe. Maybe there's examples of Russian excessiveness. But in nature, to charge someone with a war crime, you have to have clear intent to commit a war crime. And the moment you move into the fog of war, where you have territorial units in unmarked civilian clothes throwing Molotov cocktails, calling in artillery strikes, etc., and the Russians come in and therefore have a right under international law to assume ill intent on the part of a male of military age in civilian clothes behaving in a manner that could constitute a potential threat, because just the block before, a similar male like that threw a Molotov cocktail on an armored personnel carrier, burning 12 guys to death. Another male with his cell phone called in artillery strikes that hit a command post, killing 40 guys. And now you come in and there's a guy, military age, civilian clothes, acting in a way that doesn't constitute running for fear of his life. And you say, take him out. Now, was he an innocent man? If the answer is yes, so sad, too bad, shouldn't have been where you are. It's called collateral damage. But this notion that Russia is committing wide-scale, broad-spectrum war crimes is, frankly speaking, absurd. The people who are committing war crimes in this conflict are the Ukrainians. We have documented evidence of them slaughtering Russian prisoners of war, a war crime. We have documented evidence suggesting that they are using chemical weapons against Russians, a war crime. And we now have documented evidence without, it cannot be questioned, that they use humans, civilians, as a human shield, a war crime. The war criminals reside in Kiev. So it's about time that the Ukrainian people understand that your government has basically sold you out to the West, to the collective West. Your defense minister acknowledges that Ukraine has become little more than the meat producing part of a proxy conflict between the collective West and Russia. They provide the equipment, Ukraine provides the meat, and it goes into the meat grinder. Is that really the fate that you want, Ukraine? Is that what you're hoping to get from this? So and I don't know if you just had a nuclear blast or not, but your camera just faded out there. I didn't know. Maybe the Russians got a little too mad and preempted you with a nuke. But the bottom line
happens
is,
every time I talk to you, Scott. That's, I mean,
the bottom line is
plugs, you know.
Yeah, the bottom line is that the biggest threat to Ukraine right now is Zelensky. He's the biggest threat, and the quickest way out of this is for the Ukrainian people to remove him from the equation and replace him with somebody who will seek an immediate cessation of hostilities, but they will be a cessation on Russia's terms. And Russia's terms can no longer be ignored or poo-pooed. I know there's people in the West who say, "Now we don't want to give Russian credence." I'm sorry. The territories that Russia has annexed are going to be permanent part of Russia. There's no peace agreement without that. There's growing recognition in the West that that is in fact the case. It is the demilitarization. All this NATO equipment can no longer be part of Ukraine. It must either be destroyed or turned over to the Russians or returned to the NATO provider. But the Ukrainian military is over. It will either die or surrender. That's it. And denazification. The Zelensky regime is history. It's no longer there. And there's reason to believe that the Russians are actively preparing for a period of 2 to 3 years of military government in Ukraine, during which time there will be extensive denazification taking place. If you're a member of the Svoboda Party, right sector, run for your lives, because the Russians will catch you and they will hold you to account for the crimes that you've committed, political and otherwise. So, and this is a reality. This is the fate of Ukraine. The only question now is, what will constitute Ukraine? Will Ukraine be inclusive of Odessa? Will Ukraine be inclusive of Kharkov? This is what the Ukrainian people have to think about right now, because you've lost Zaporizhia, you've lost Kherson, you've lost the Donbass, you've lost Crimea, you're everything. And the question is, how much more do you want to lose? Because if you continue down this path with Zelensky, you're going to lose a lot more. And you have to decide if that's what you want. If you say giving your life for Ukraine is a noble cause, then give your life for Ukraine, but not by fighting the Russians. Give your life by taking down the dictator that's currently destroying your nation.
Yeah. Scott, do you think both France and Germany are getting a little tired of this? Because apparently Macron and Schultz supposedly contacted Zelensky and said, "Hey, you really need to start thinking about peace talks." I mean, especially Germany. This winter, I'm sure, has been rough on the German citizens. And Schultz, who's no brain. In fact, Peter Lavelle over at RT likes to call him Sergeant Schultz. I've watched that show a few times, and I find it humorous when he does that. But you think maybe you might start to see some defections, and then without remember, the United States was egging on Germany, come on, you got to hurry up with these tanks, and we'll do tanks if you do tanks, or if we do tanks, maybe you should do them. And the tanks are kind of irrelevant, as you've pointed out on this show. But I mean, maybe cooler heads might prevail. Have you heard any of these talks?
Well, I mean, right now, I think the biggest issue in the West is how to manage the inevitability of a Russian victory. And the best way to mitigate that is to get Ukraine to commit to a termination of the conflict as soon as possible, because then the West can save face by saying only our intervention allowed Ukraine to survive.
Yeah.
Nobody could have survived against the horrible hordes of the Russians coming out from the east, those new Mongol invaders and all that stuff. So that's the myth. The longer this conflict goes on, though, the less likely is that Russia is going to want to give the West that out, and the more likely is that Russia is going to insist on a unconditional surrender that will be humiliating not only for the Ukrainians involved but also for the West. So. And unfortunately for the West, politicians are loath to admit that they were wrong. The wise course of action for Macron and Schultz to get together and go, "We bet on the wrong horse." Guys, this war's over. We're done. We're finished. It's over. We can't save it. We're not going to prolong the suffering and agony of the Ukrainian people any longer. The United States, I'm sorry, we're out. Ukraine, we'd like to help you, but you've got to be willing to stop this nonsense. And Zelensky, Miami's looking pretty good right now. You might want to head there because your days are done. We're finished with you. That would be the smart move, because then Germany and France would be in a leadership position going forward. Be able to have a meaningful play. Although the Russians would be loath to trust them because we can get first principles. It was, after all, Germany and France that promised Russia that the Minsk Accords were a viable, direction towards peace. So can France and Germany ever be trusted again? But the other thing that's happening too is that, Nord Stream.
Yeah.
It's gaining traction in Germany. No matter how much the Biden administration wants to, hear no evil, see no evil, say no evil when it comes to Nord Stream, even though we have a president profession. And it's great. I love it. Normally they just focus on Biden's face when he gives it, the tough, the senile tough guy, the confused, determined look of, we're going to shut it down. But what they don't ever show you is Schultz. The look of abject terror on his face as Biden says this, and he knows he can't say anything because he's a German leader that has no cojones. They don't show that, but the German people are starting to wake up. It seems. The Ukrainians tried a little trick to put a destroyed Russian T-72 tank on a pedestal outside the Bundestag. And instead, it's become a rallying point for 50,000 Germans who cover it with flowers and pro-Russian sympathies. They don't want a war with Russia. They're against the policy. Tens of thousands of people surrounded Ramstein Air Base, where they, of course, have the Ukrainian contact group meetings, and are saying the same thing: America, get out. I think there's a growing recognition that America attacked Germany, that America betrayed Germany. America's not a friend of Germany, and the German people are starting to wake up. And whether this is sustainable has yet to be seen, but I think we're seeing the beginning of an awakening in Germany that's based on collective outrage over what the United States did to them. Again, if you're a journalist out there and your name isn't Seymour Hersh, because we know where he stands, he's done the right thing. But if you're a journalist out there and you even hint that this wasn't done by the United States, you're not a journalist. Okay, there is no balance here. There is no he said, she said. The data is overwhelming that the United States attacked Germany. And if you even hint that not only maybe the United States didn't do it, but now you buy into the American narrative, oh, it was Russia that did it. You're not a journalist. You're a Western propagandist. You may call yourself a journalist, but you're not. The evidence is clear. Biden's confession on February, you cannot walk away from that. You cannot walk away from Victoria Nuland's confession and her glee in the outcome. You cannot walk away from Tony Blinken rubbing his hands greedily as he talks about great opportunities that come from this. You can't walk away from Vault Ops 22, where we have the means to carry this out taking place. You can't walk away from Seymour Hersh's reporting. If you don't like his reporting, then take it apart. But don't sit there and buy into the Western narrative. He's just an old man making stuff. Cy Hersh doesn't make stuff up. I can personally tell you that. I don't know his sources, but I am a good friend of his. And I will tell you right now that my 2 decades of friendship lead me to strongly believe that Cy doesn't make shit up. Excuse my language, stuff up.
Right.
That Cy reports based upon, and here's the other thing I'd like to point out to people. Well, he's not telling us his source. Really? So Cy Hirsch should become James Risen, such a really poor reporter that his source gets arrested and goes to jail. Cy Hirsch should become Judith Miller, who went to jail and ultimately confessed and report. What, Cy Hirsch should put people in jail? Is that what you want? Is that the game you want? Cy Hirsch has never put a single person in jail. Why? Because of the way he writes. You will never find his source by reverse engineering his story. I reverse engineer stories for a living. I can go through most articles out there and say, aha, that's the source, that's the source, that's the source. But about a 90% success rate. With Cy Hirsch, you ain't never going to find the source because he's never going to give you a hint of where the source came from. He will protect it. So all the people who are out there are frustrated. I don't know Cy's source. You're not meant to know his source. That's why he's the greatest investigative journalist that has ever lived. He uncovers the stories nobody wants uncovered, and he reports it in a way that you will never find out who his source is. And that's good. So I think what we have right out here is, one, we have journalists who have basically bought into, they've sold their souls out for the mainstream narrative. They're tools of the establishment, tools of government, because that's where they get their sources of information from. Read their stories. Read their stories and see where they get their sources from. And if their sources come solely from industry or government, there's a problem there because there's no independent thinking going on. Journalism used to include some analysis, but apparently analysis now is a threat to the balance of journalism. But it's not balanced, because when was the last time journalists reported responsibly on both the West and Russian sides of the story? Is there anybody in the West that reports about Russia? When you take a look, for instance, on the February 21st speech given by Vladimir Putin, all you hear is it's bitter. He's a bitter man. He's an angry man. He's a frustrated man. He's this man. He's that man. He's that. The last thing you hear is, oh my God, the guy is actually laying out, a blueprint. He's telling us what's going on inside Russia. Ray McGovern, a former CIA analyst, Soviet analyst who I have the greatest respect for, straight up said, criminology is not intelligence work. Basically the way we used to do it after Brezhnev died, or even the latter days of Brezhnev, every May 9th Victory Day, who's standing Brezhnev? How has it changed? Oh my God, this man moved 3 steps more to the right. This guy's looking down at his watch. What does it mean and what the Politburo is doing? That's garbage. But that's what they resorted to because they wouldn't do what real intelligence analysts do. There was something called the Foreign Broadcast Information Service, FBIS, run by the CIA, that would on a daily basis publish the speeches given by Soviet officials, newspaper articles that covered it. And they laid out there in great detail. I used to read that stuff vociferously. I mean, I still have the old copies just because I miss it so much. It was a wonderful source. But these politicized people would say, that's that's Soviet propaganda. You can't read that. That's Soviet propaganda. So they're now left looking for which side of the hand. Is his watch on the left side or the right side? Is he wearing a scarf that's this way or that? That's not intelligence. That's voodoo. That's guesswork. That's stupidity. Yet people would actually write reports based on that and ignore the statements made by Soviet officials, which history has shown been 100% correct. Soviet officials never lied to the Soviet people about these fundamental issues. When they reported about the economy, they reported facts as they believed it to be true. But their job wasn't to propagandize. They had other tools for that. But the fact of the matter is, when they gave a speech, it was an honest reflection of where they stood on an issue, and that should have been the basis of the report. Vladimir Putin gave us an honest reflection of where he stood and where Russia stood on critical issues. But people won't listen to that because it's Russian propaganda. So if you're a journalist and you're not reporting responsibly about this speech, you're not a journalist. You're a Western propagandist. If your initial reaction to anything coming out of Russia is, well, that's Russian propaganda, you're not a journalist. A journalist has to dig deep into it the same way that you claim you dig deep into the Western stories. But journalists don't dig deep. They are stenographers. They repeat exactly that comes. Why? Because that's their customer base. Their customer base isn't the truth. Customer base is the people that pays their salaries. So they have to appease the industry because the industry pays their salaries. They have to appease the governments because the governments gives them the information that allows them to write the pieces that reflect government policy, to promote, to become an echo chamber. That's the status of modern journalism in America today. Ask the New York Times, read the New York Times, read the Washington Post. It's very rare that you get an in-depth analysis of what's going on inside Russia. God forbid you do it.
Yeah.
Like, God forbid I actually go and listen to what they say and then report back on it. And because I become a Russian propagandist. I become a tool of Putin. It's stupid. And people say, Scott, why do you put so much emphasis on Russia? Because I don't need to put more emphasis on the West. It's already being done. What's lacking in the balance here is a Russian perspective. And so, because they have failed to do that, I decided to do it. Now I'm called a Russian propagandist. I'm called somebody who, has sold out to the Russians. No, I sell out to the truth. And anybody who doubts that, look at my position on Iraq. All right. Did you think I sold out to Saddam? Is that what you thought? That's what they said. No, I sold out to the truth.
Right.
And I'll tell you what, too. I'm pretty damn smart. I'm not the smartest guy out there, but I'm pretty damn smart. So when I commit to something, it's not because of a gut reaction. Oh my God, this feels good in my gut. I'm going to commit to it. It's because I actually spent about 4,000 hours sifting through the data that nobody else will sift through, weighing it out, balancing it out, and saying, this is where I stand on the issue. I don't just come out and say, this is where I stand because it's in my gut. Or I don't say, I stand on this issue because the New York Times reported it this way. I say, I stand on this issue because of A, B, C, D, E, F, G, things that I have assessed, things that I have looked at. But you can find fault in that, and I'm not perfect. I can make a mistake. But to call me, to simplify me as a tool of Russia, as a Russian propagandist, is the greatest insult that there can be. But you know what? I'm used to getting insulted, so I'm tired. I'm learning to just let it flick off my back. I will say this about Iraq: there's not an interview that I run away from, not a single one. And history has shown. Go back and read them. You don't have to, but do it. I challenge anybody. Go back and read my interviews and find out where I was wrong. When I spoke to whoever the hairdo lady was at Paula Zahn. Paula Zahn going to be my friend. She was my friend. She thought she was going to be my friend. But Paula Zahn sat there, and when the time came, she just interviewed me and attacked me and attacked me and attacked me. Hey, Paula, I'll take my interview. I'll put it up there right now. Every word I said turned out to be true, and every question you asked turned out to be politicized question coming from above. You're not a journalist, Paula. You were an attack dog sicked on me by the establishment who was afraid of the truth I was putting out there. And I will say the same thing today. What I'm saying about Russia, it's the truth.
Yeah.
It's the truth. Is it perfect? No, nobody has perfect truth. But it's honest truth. It's sound analysis. And people who question me don't do it with good intent. I have no problem from a debate. You want to have a debate with me? Let's have a debate. Want to have a dialogue? Let's have it. Let's have a discussion. And if you can, through the process of the debate, show me where my analysis is wrong, where my facts might be incomplete, I will happily correct the record because I'm in the business of truth. I'm not in the business of defending my assessment. My assessment either is reflective of the truth or isn't. And if it's wrong, it needs to be corrected. I believe in that process. How many people in the Western media establishment believe in that process? Once they commit to a story, how many of them go, oh my God, we got it wrong, let's correct the record? None of them do that.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's one of the reasons, Scott, you're not a frequent guest on any of these mainstream media shows. I think, you would probably eat everybody for lunch, a few times. And it's kind of sad because you mentioned about bias, but also kind of like equal time. Like, is there anybody with an alternative viewpoint? Everybody walking in lockstep? I caught a couple of clips from MSNBC this morning, and it's difficult to watch, Morning Joe, Morning Mika, whatever you want to call it. And, they're talking about how all of a sudden for, how many years we were supposed to believe where the virus came from, right? And now suddenly, the CIA and different agencies are coming forward and saying, it could have been a bioweapon, could have been it was maybe made in the lab, and I remember Donald Trump saying, I think it was made in the lab, and everybody just laughed at him. And all of a sudden, because, China, they're kind of doing a little teamwork with Russia, or they're going to form a whole coalition, and the United States is going to be left behind. And we can't have that in New York City and DC and all of these places where most people don't relate to any of what they talk about, Scott. It's kind of funny. You watch the show, and I'm thinking, I'm a farmer in, Mississippi. And how does this affect my life? It doesn't. But all I know is groceries cost a lot more than they used to, and why is that? And can someone explain that to me? We're running the printing presses so we can send $8 billion to Ukraine, and people don't connect those dots because the media won't explain it to them that way. They just say, well, for democracy, we have to do this I keep hearing democracy. What about here in the United States? What about our democracy? What about our citizens? And so it's kind of laughable, all of the propaganda, and there's no balance. There's no equal time, whether you liked the guy or not. I remember Rush Limbaugh would come on at noon and people would say, hey, we need equal time in the afternoon after your show, Rush. You've had 3 hours to say whatever you want to say. And he would say, you know what? I am equal time. And if you looked at the media landscape, and even since that moment, whether you liked Limbaugh or not, I didn't like everything he said and did, but I mean, he was a different point of view. You're a different point of view, Scott Ritter. And yet, surprisingly, Scott, if I were and I know why, because like you mentioned, all this stuff is funded and financed by people who have, real interests in seeing this war go on forever. And so that's why you're not going to be invited on. Thank goodness you come on shows like this. You're on YouTube. I wanted to mention now, you did a speech, or you did the speech you would have given at the Rage Against the War Machine rally. Where can you find that speech?
If you go to skyritterextra.com, which is my my website, that speech will be up there in my Substack.
All right. So I just wanted to alert.
Just so everybody knows, it's free. Even though I call it a Substack, I don't hide anything behind a paywall. If you felt inclined to support, feel free. We would love the support. But when I started this whole adventure, I did it because I believe it's important to provide alternative sources of information, alternative sources of view. And you can't provide that if you hide it behind a paywall. I don't condemn those who do it. That's a business decision that they made, and I wish them the greatest success. And it's probably, I could probably have greater financial success if I did hide it behind a paywall. But the purpose of this journey at this point in time is not to succeed financially. It's to get information out to people who are desirous of that information. So it's there on the Substack. You can get it for free. But again, if you want to help me continue to show up on shows like Dave's, you gotta help me buy the time, because time is money. You got to pay a mortgage, you got to pay the bills, and when I do stuff like this, and you're the you're the third one I've done today, and I've got 3 more after this.
Wow.
Which means I'm not writing, and if I'm not writing, I'm not making money. And so if people want this to occur, just help out if you can. If you can't, great, because I'm here for those who can't. I'm here for everybody, because it's a process. It's not about me. It's about you. It's about the audience. And the fact that you're watching says you think there might be something useful in this interaction that we're having right now that helps you learn more, form your own positions. So that's why I'm glad to do it, and I'm grateful for you to give me the opportunity to do it. But time ain't free.
I hear you. And well, you've got a book too. If people want to purchase that book, you could see it over one of my shoulders here. And I think you've got a larger placard behind you of the book, which again, I've plugged here on the show. Maybe I'll throw a link in the description box. People can order it off of Amazon pretty easily, and they're shipping it now, Scott. In the early days, I think
they finally got. I'll tell you. I mean, look, we're in a sort of a free flow YouTube thing, so we're not structured too much. And you've encouraged me to go off on tangents in the past, so I will do so again. I love Clarity Press.
Yeah.
When I came out of prison, no publisher would touch me, none. But I had things to say. And Clarity Press helped me helped publish a great book on a deal breaker on Donald Trump and the end of the Iraq nuclear deal. If you guys want to know why we're out of the nuclear deal and how that happened, Deal Breaker's the book. Yeah. They then helped me put out a great book called Scorpion King, which is a history of America's nuclear weapons programs from FDR to Donald Trump. Everybody who's read it says it's the single best volume on this subject out there, and I agree with them. It was written to be that. I'm not bragging. It's just there was a need for this book, and there it is. And Clarity Press helped bring it out. But the numbers of both those books weren't impressive. It doesn't matter that you write a good book. Yeah, you got to sell a book. And when I came up with Disarm at the Time of Perestroika, Clarity Press was a little bit gun shy. They're like, we like the book, but we don't think it's going to resonate. We don't think that people are going to, I mean, it's sort of like old history, 30-year-old arms control history and all that. And I said, oh no, I think it'll do okay. So their initial press printing was, I think, 500 copies. Well, those 500 copies had sold out before they even got off the press.
Nice.
But then when you do printing, understand that printer is competing with other books. So you get your time on print and you say 500 and you sell it out. Now you have to go back and get time, but you got to get in a queue because there's other books being printed on this printer. And so you get in the queue, but now how much do we commit to in the queue? And so they commit the 500, but by the time it comes back down, you're already 2,000 in the deficit because it's selling, but you can't ship. And the problem with can't shipping is when people don't get the book, sometimes they cancel the order, and it creates sort of this negative vibe. They're now catching up, and I think they're finally starting to print the books and numbers. And I'll tell you what, this book isn't going to go away. It's getting published in Russia, in the Russian language, by a major Russian publisher, and there will be a book tour. And I'm going to go over to Russia, and I'm going to take the message of this book, which is a message of hope, message of history, talk about how we once were able to overcome every obstacle possible to achieve meaningful arms control, and the processes involved, which talked about human-to-human contact, breaking down walls of distrust, overcoming Russophobia. If you don't see a pattern between what happened then and today, then you're blind. And the idea is to take this message to the Russian people, then capture their response. And then I'm going to come back and I'm going to tour the United States and show the American people how this message resonated with the Russians and get the American people to hopefully buy in at least. And so this book is going to be around for some time now. This book anchors my ultimate objective, which is putting 1 million people in Central Park on June 22nd, 2024, to repeat what happened on June 12th, 1982, when 1 million people went to Central Park in support of arms control. And guess what? 5 years later, we got the INF Treaty that saved the world. Right now, the world's in trouble. Russia's just suspended participation in the New START Treaty. There is no arms control. There is no new treaty vehicle. And if we don't get people elected to office that believe in arms control, we're all going to die. And I'm not just making this up, guys. We're all going to die. And so how do we do that? Well, I'm going to do it by using this book as a vehicle to inform, educate, and motivate enough people to come to Central Park and maybe some other venues and show their support for arms control and to make arms control a politically viable issue for the 2024 election. I mean, I don't know how it's done, but maybe there's a way people can sign a statement that says, if you're a candidate and you're not committing right now that you're going to make arms control your highest priority because that's the only thing going to save our lives, if you're not committed, you can't get our vote. I'm not telling you how to vote, but I am going to say that you can't vote for anybody who won't sign this paper, who won't sign this statement. Yeah. So you can have if a Republican and a Democrat both sign it, then you vote the way you want to vote. If neither sign it, and there's an independent candidate out there who will sign it, then you vote for the independent candidate. Yeah. But you make sure it is the litmus test, because it's not controversial, guys. We're talking about saving your grandchildren's lives, saving your children's life, saving your own life. It's not like I'm asking you to engage on a Second Amendment debate or a right to life debate. This is the ultimate right to life debate. This is, we all have a right to live, and our government doesn't have a right to engage in a policy of nuclear arms race encouragement that will manifest itself in a nuclear apocalypse that kills everybody. So this book is the cornerstone, the keystone, the foundation of that effort. If you want to get ahead of the game, buy the book now, read it, and then help us save the world.
Well, on that note, pretty appropriate way to wrap things up. Scott Ritter, thank you so much again for being here, sir. Best of luck in the days ahead. I know you got a lot on your plate as always, and we'll see you real soon, hopefully.
All right. Well, thank you very much.